Hey guys, it is day 2 of Read Aloud of The Invention of Hugo Cabret. We finished chapter 1, and I will be honest, it's really hard to read to a phone because that's what I'm reading to right now. So bear with me because I'm trying really hard, but I love it much more when you guys are sitting down and actually listening and I can see your faces. So, title of chapter 2 you can't really see it because of the sun. I'm sitting on the floor in my room. But anyway, chapter 2, the clocks. Hugo ran down the hallway and disappeared back inside the metal vent in the wall. He paused for a moment. The air was cool and damp. A few dim light bulbs provided a tiny bit of illumination inside the dark of the passageways. Maybe this isn't... We have him going back through his vent. If you guys remember when we left off, he had just had an argument with the toy shopkeeper, and the toy shopkeeper had taken his notebook with all his fancy drawings. And now Hugo is running away after that argument. I'm trying to guess where he is. Some of you already know, because if you haven't figured it out, this is actually a movie, and it's on Netflix, but I am hoping that you guys aren't watching the movie until we are done, and then we can compare and contrast the difference between what we read in the book and what we saw in the movie, if you decide you want to watch it at the end of this. But you notice he's going up a long staircase, down a little hallway, through a door. I guess I can get closer. Let's read a little bit more. Hugo opened the door and let himself inside. Above the ceiling of the main waiting area was a cluster of secret apartments that had been built for the people who ran the train station years ago. Most of them had long been abandoned. Only one was still in use. Some sunlight filtered through the dirty skylight. Hugo looked at the rows and rows of jars filled with pieces from all the toys he had stolen from the toy booth over the past few months. The jars sat on shelves made from scavenged planks he had found inside the walls of the station. Under his rickety bed lay a pile of Hugo's drawings. His deck of cards rested on a dusty trunk in the middle of the room. Nearby, on a small table, was a stack of envelopes, his uncle's uncashed paychecks, accumulating week by week. Hugo wiped his eyes and picked up his bucket of tools. He stuffed some more matches and candles into his pockets and set to work. As usual, Hugo headed first to the big glass clocks on the roof, because they were the hardest to reach. They were like huge round windows and looked out over the city, one facing north and one facing south. Hugo had to climb up a long, dark staircase and slither through an opening in the ceiling at the top of a ladder to get inside. During the day, his eyes always stung for a few moments when the flood of light through the glass. The motors and gears of these clocks were the biggest in the station, and Hugo was often afraid that his hand was going to get caught. In the corner of the room, attached by ropes, hung huge weights that kept the clocks running. He checked the time on the glass clocks against the time on his uncle's railroad watch, which he kept with his tools and wound diligently every morning. He then took a moment to carefully look the whole mechanism over, and added a few drops of oil to each gear shaft from a little oil can in his kit. Hugo's head tilted slightly to the side as he listened to the beat of the clock, waiting until he was sure the machine was running correctly. Once he had finished with the clocks on the roof, he climbed down the ladder and the long staircase. Back inside the dark passageways, he checked the other clocks in the station, all of which were made of brass and could be maintained from inside the walls. Hugo lit his candles to help him see and began with a clock that overlooked the ticket booths. This clock, like all the others, had weights too, but much smaller ones which disappeared into the floor. Hugo attached a crank to the back of the clock and, using all of his strength, turned it as far as it would go. And here's an illustration of him cranking the clocks. So can you guys figure out what Hugo's job is based on that little bit? If you guessed a clock turner, you're right. He keeps the clocks on the right pattern and running at the correct times for all the passengers that go to the train stations or around the town that can see the clocks. So, moving on. Hugo then made sure the gears and levers were moving accurately, and he checked that the time was correct on the miniature dial built into the back of the clockworks. Next, he moved through the hidden passageways to the ring of clocks around the train platforms, and then to the back of the smaller clocks that faced the interior offices, including the station inspectors. Looking through the number, Hugo could see the station inspector's desk, and in the corner of the office, a cage of a small jail cell that sat waiting for any criminal caught in the station. Hugo had seen men and women locked up in there, and a few times he had even seen boys no older than himself in the cells, their eyes red from crying. Eventually, these people were taken away, and Hugo never saw them again. From the offices, Hugo followed a long, hidden tunnel to the back of the clock opposite the old man's toy booth. He wished he could avoid this clock, but he knew he couldn't skip any of them. Peering out through the numbers, Hugo spied the old man again, alone in his toy booth, at the end of the hallway, looking through the pages of Hugo's notebook. Hugo wanted to scream out, but he didn't. He oiled the clock and listened to it carefully. He could tell it wouldn't need to be wound for another day or two, so Hugo kept going until all 27 clocks in the station had been attended to, just the way his uncle had taught him. We don't know much about Hugo's uncle yet, do we? That's the first time we mentioned his paychecks and that his uncle had taught him how to turn the clocks. That was a really short chapter, so we're going to go ahead into chapter 3, which is called Snowfall. The old man slowly shuffled to the front of the toy booth. He was beginning to close up shop, lowering the front wooden grate when Hugo approached him from behind. Hugo knew how to walk silently, but he let his feet fall loudly on the tiles to let the old man know he was there. "Pick up your feet, boy." The old man glanced over his shoulder. "I hate the sound of shoe heels clicking on the floor." The old man continued to close the grate and lock it. The halls of the station were nearly empty. Hugo knew the station inspector would be making his evening rounds at the other end of the station, and Hugo figured he had a few minutes before he showed up here. The old man finished closing up and double-checked the lock on his booth. "What is your name, boy?" Hugo hesitated. He was going to lie, but then for some reason, he said his real name. Hugo Cabret." "Listen to me, Hugo Cabret. I told you to stay away from me. I will drag you to the station inspector's office and lock you up myself if I see you again. Do you understand what I am saying?" "Give me back my notebook." "I'm going home to burn your notebook." With that, the old man glanced quickly at the clock across from the toy booth and headed out under the great iron ribs of the train station. He emerged through a golden door into the dark streets of Paris. It was the end of winter, and a light snow had begun to fall. Hugo watched him go. It had been a very long time since Hugo had left the train station, and he wasn't dressed for winter, but within moments he burst through the doors. "You can't burn my notebook," he shouted to the old man. "I can," came the answer. Hugo wanted to tackle him, to knock him on the ground, and to take back his notebook, but he didn't think he was big enough, and besides, the old man was strong. Hugo's arm still ached from where he had been grabbed earlier. "Stop clicking the streets with your heels," the old man hissed through his teeth. "And don't make me say it again." He shook his head and adjusted his hat. Then quietly he said to himself, "I hope the snow covers everything so all the footsteps are silenced and the whole city can be at peace." And here's a bit of a snowy cityscape. So you can see where they have left the train station and are walking right down here in the corner. And Hugo is following behind the old man wherever he goes. Maybe it looks a little cold. Down the narrow hallway. And here we go. They soon arrived at a decrepit apartment building across from the graveyard. The whole building seemed to lean slightly to the side. Ivy had once covered the walls, but it had been torn away, leaving long, interlocking scars in the cracked paint. The old man opened the chipped green door with a large key. Turning back to Hugo, he said, "Don't you know the sound of clicking boot heels can summon ghosts? Do you want to be followed by ghosts?" The old man stepped quickly inside and slammed the door behind him. And here's Hugo, left standing outside his big green door. And that's the end of chapter 3. So we have met Hugo, we have met the toy keeper, and now they have a problem because Hugo has lost, or not lost, but he no longer has his beloved notebook, and the old man says he's going to burn it. So the next chapter for next week is going to be chapter 4, and it's called The Window. So again, I wish you guys were sitting in front of me so I could actually read to you, and I'll try to get better at reading to my phone. But until next week, guys. Oh, sorry, my phone.